Hello. Welcome to this week's instalment of Aucademy Educates. I'm David Gray Hammond, and I'm here today with Victoria and a pigeon that says they are definitely not Psy, but I have a suspicion that it might be. So, should we start with audio descriptions? I'm David Gray Hammond. I am a white person wearing thick-rimmed glasses. I have a lip piercing, a beard, a shaved head that actually does need some shaving soon, an ear tunnel, and I'm wearing a blue t-shirt sat next to the famously dangerous bookcase. Sai, would you like to go next?
Sai says, this week I have mostly been a pigeon again.
Fantastic. And Victoria?
Victoria, a white older person with glasses, long grey hair, wearing a red checked shirt, blue zipped hoodie, sitting on a pink velvet sofa.
Thank you very much. Today we are going to talk about meltdowns and shutdowns. So yeah, that'll be a good one.
Fun pack.
I'm always really awkward at these introductions. I never know what I'm supposed to be saying. Right, so to kick things off, do we have some? Are we doing a slideshow? Did I see that in discussion before? Is that how we're starting? Here we go. Okay, shall I read out what's on the screen? So, what are they? Meltdowns are external responses that are caused by being overwhelmed and can occur for both autistic children and adults. Signs of a meltdown can vary from person to person and situation to situation. An autistic meltdown should not be confused with a tantrum, which usually stops when the person gets what they want, whilst a meltdown has no goal, but is simply due to distress and overwhelm. I mean, it's a good distinction to make. You know, people often ask, is it a tantrum or a meltdown, or aren't they the same thing? But in my experience, tantrums are goal-oriented, whereas meltdowns are literally, it's like the pressure is built up inside, and it's more like a neurological event where the brain is just so overwhelmed that it kind of loses control. And I think it's really important to make that distinction. If your autistic child or your autistic student or your autistic colleague is having a meltdown, it's not a tantrum. They're not trying to get a particular outcome other than for the overwhelm to stop. And you know, when we accuse people of having tantrums when in fact they're having meltdowns, I think we often find, I mean, it's invalidation. It's very invalidating to tell people they're having tantrums when in actual fact it's a meltdown. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's quite invalidating when it is assumed that you have, particularly as an adult, that you have control over it. That's, I think there's very few occasions I've had a meltdown in public, and it has been said that it has been assumed that it's something that I can prevent, and it isn't.
Yeah.
It's like nobody would willingly put themselves in that situation and have such an outward display. It's just total distress.
Yeah.
And it's a point where you're not aware you have been almost, it's sometimes that you've driven to a point where, I don't know, with me, my brain has got so quick and I can't slow it down, and everything around me is just totally overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. Do we have another slide? So the signs of a meltdown might include anger, crying, shouting, involuntary body movements, and self-harm. I think personally I have had all of these. The involuntary body movements and the self-harm kind of go together for me because, I mean, quite honestly, bear in mind I'm a big guy, so if I have a meltdown, it can be quite intimidating for people. Luckily, I don't have them too often, but I've come to from meltdowns to find I've put my arm through a wooden door and things like that without even realizing I've done it. You know, it's not it's dangerous for not just other people, but for the person having the meltdown themselves. Because, like I said, it's more like a neurological event. You just lose control. And yeah, are there any signs that people would like to add to that?
Sai says, for me, meltdowns are intense and overwhelming experiences that can be triggered by various stimuli. I may feel like I'm reaching a breaking point after a build-up of small stresses throughout the day, or a sudden change or an unexpected event can be the tipping point.
Yeah, sudden change is a big one for me. If things don't go the way I'm expecting, it's really distressing.
I think with me, it's cumulative and is usually an indicator that I'm heading towards burnout.
Mm.
I don't really get the shouting at all. Yeah, no, but it's like the crying. For me, it feels rage through, but for me, it feels extreme, but probably externally to others, it's not.
Okay. Next slide, please. Oh,
Sai finished with, I want to cease to exist afterwards. I feel so ashamed. Yeah, I think it
I,
is the shame, because almost, I guess, you can sort of see the devastation around you that you weren't aware of at the time.
and on top of that, there's sort of a cultural standard that, especially as adults, I mean, we do this to children as well, which is wrong on all sorts of levels. But as adults, we're kind of expected to have it together all the time. So if you're an adult who has a meltdown, you're seen as being childlike and incompetent, and it's not okay for people to view you like that, you know, because it just adds to that shame, you know, and that cycle of shame where, you know, it feeds a lot of negative aspects of being autistic.
And I think this is where it spirals out of control as well.
Yeah. Okay. The causes. Meltdowns, like shutdowns, can be caused by anything that is overwhelming. For example, sensory overwhelm, loud music, bright lights, being touched, exhaustion, e.g., from excessive masking, increased expectations and demands, lack of control, autonomy and choices, changes in routine, environments, etc., difficulty navigating a social situation/relationship, feelings of rejection, sensitivity, dysregulation. I mean, that covers really quite a lot of the causes, I think. I'm not sure I could add too much to that. Anything, if you imagine, you know, anything that is negative really can feed into it, because as has been mentioned by Sai and Victoria, and even in my own experience, even if it's not one big thing triggering a meltdown or a shutdown, that cumulative effect of lots of little things can be enough to, the pressure builds and builds and builds, and it has to go somewhere. We can only hold so much inside for so long.
Yeah, and the sensory overwhelm is almost, it doesn't have to be loud music. It can be any sound, because you're in that state of hypervigilance that the most minute of sound seems extraordinarily loud, and all the lights seem bright, and everything is just too much because your system basically is in override and is in a total state of panic. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So I think
absolutely.
all of these things are almost is just the accumulation, and I don't think sometimes you can work out what the cause is. Sai says sensory overload is a common trigger for me. Loud noises, bright lights, and strong smells can all be overwhelming and cause a meltdown. Social situations can be stressful and overwhelming, especially if I'm not familiar with the people or the environment. Communication difficulties, such as trouble expressing myself or understanding others, can also trigger for me.
So yeah, I think that gives some good ideas of the sort of triggers for meltdowns. Shall we move on to the next slide? So what to do? Each individual autistic person will experience meltdowns in their own way, and therefore will have individual ways of dealing with them. They are most likely common triggers that are bound to cause a meltdown, in which you should aim to predict and prevent such situations. Work out how best the person can calm down, whether it's physical comfort, a favorite stim, toy, or removing them from the situation altogether. Lower the demands upon them also. The demands one is really important, and you have to really think about how you conceptualize demands in this situation, I think, because, you know, even saying something like just calm down is a demand. If you say calm down, you have placed a demand on that person.
But who's ever calmed down in the whole history of the world by being told to calm down? It's like, do you really think I am going to act like this if I want?
Yeah, so many people act like that's the go-to phrase. It's not. It shouldn't be, because, like you said, no one has ever calmed down from being told to calm down. Lots of people have got sort of escalated from that phrase. So you really have to think about, basically any kind of instruction at this point can be considered a demand.
Yes.
And it can be as simple as, I don't know, are you okay? Because you've then given them an instruction to answer your question. It's a demand. Sometimes it's best to go in or perhaps take a step back and give them a bit of space.
I think by the time you've got to that point, there isn't very much you can do apart from stand back. I mean, I don't think I'd want anything given to me, such as a stim or anything like that. It's just no.
No, I mean, there are some people, you know, some people enjoy using stim toys to regulate. Some people just need to flee the situation. You know, for me, something that really helps me is deep pressure. But it's got to be on my terms. If someone just comes up and touches me during a meltdown without warning, I don't really know what would happen, to be honest, because very few people have ever tried. Sai has added
Sai says, during a meltdown, I feel like I'm losing control. I may cry, scream, or hit myself. I can become nonverbal or have difficulty processing language, making it difficult to communicate my needs or feelings. It's like my emotions are so intense that my body can't contain them. Yeah, I think that says it. Libby says, I also think shutdown can be the result of masking meltdowns, as I can't cope in the situation, but I also can't express this, have a meltdown, without drawing attention to myself. Instead, it ends up internalized and my body freezes and I can't do anything. Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think
that's really important to note, actually, is, you know, meltdowns, shutdowns, all of these things kind of fall under that very well-known idea of fight, flight, freeze, fawn. You know, that we do have reactions kind of based on that. They're like, I mean, scientists, I guess, would argue it's like an adrenal response, but I always think it's a bit different in autistic people. I've never really fully known how to conceptualize it myself, but
yeah, and I think, well, we'll get on to it. I think the meltdown is externalized; it's getting it out of the body.
yeah,
But I think the shutdown is sort of more traumatic and dangerous of the body, that it is held within.
yeah, it's kind of like,
Almost nothing is externalized, and that energy doesn't sort of dissipate. And you begin to wonder where exactly it is going, because it's got to go somewhere.
I mean, based on what Libby said, for me, if I try to internalize my need to have a meltdown, because sometimes I need to have a meltdown, if I can't, I will shut down because my body gets so overwhelmed that I just dissociate. It's almost like an out of body experience. You know, it's not pleasant.
No.
But, you know, I think for the what to do, the advice I always give to people is give people their space if they're having a meltdown, try and reduce the sensory input that they're experiencing. And if you happen to know sensory inputs that are regulating for them, see if there is a way of providing them without getting up in their business. But just give them space and make sure that they're safe. You know?
Yeah, I think it's keep the person as safe, and also the people around as well, and to remove those people that don't need to be there away. One from a point of dignity and another from a point of safety.
People don't need an audience when they're having a
No,
meltdown, and that's only going to make it worse.
no, because you're almost picking up on their energy.
And you get that exposure anxiety on top of everything else. Oh, here we go. What not to do. Do not put the person in a situation that you know will cause them distress or overwhelm. Do not physically restrain the person. This does no good and only traumatizes them. Do not punish the person for having a meltdown or use behaviorist methods to control them. Do not judge/shame the person. Child or adult, they are responding to overwhelm, and judging will only make them feel ashamed or guilty for involuntarily acting out. I really, really want to push that do not judge or shame the person thing again, because this is like one of the most common things I see in autistic adults, especially, but I see it a lot in children as well, but especially adults. They've had a meltdown and they have been made to feel ashamed of that meltdown. It's not your fault. Like, you don't wake up and go, I'm going to have a meltdown today. Like, no one does that.
And it's also this thing, and it comes from sort of all these, the behaviorist approaches. Let's look at what the, and whatever the before things that have triggered this. Let's sort of dissect this and expect, and not realizing that something could have triggered, and this could be built up from long ago. You may never find out, and the person's probably not aware of what is going on. So to have to sit and have the shame of going through it all, and it just sort of escalates the situation.
Yeah, yeah. And another one I wanted to zoom in on is the physical restraint. So even if you're trained in physical restraint is an inherently dangerous practice. This doesn't necessarily mean if your child is having a meltdown and about to run out in front of a car, just let them do it. That's not what we're saying. But pinning someone to the ground, restraining their arms, their legs, physically immobilizing someone is just going to make the situation worse. And as we know, it can endanger people's lives. So really avoid restraint at all costs, especially, the if anything, the professional restraint positions are the ones that have caused the most harm.
Yeah. Aucademy says, have you calmed down? What was it all about? A bit of an overreaction. These will only make things worse and make the person feel worse.
Yeah, I mean, I find the best question someone can ask me when I've come down from a meltdown is sort of, how can I help you? Is there anything you need?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to feel like I don't need someone to tell me I've just had a massive overwhelmed reaction. You know, I know what's happened. Like, especially as an autistic adult, I've had enough meltdowns to know when I've had a meltdown. We don't need it shoved in our face.
Yeah, I think it's the reassurance to know that the other person, their view of you hasn't changed.
Yeah.
There's no judgment in what has happened.
I think this is something that, you know, a lot of autistic people worry about in general with sort of behaving autistically, is that if the wrong people see it, people will see them differently. People think that they will be seen as a stereotype rather than the real autistic person. And, you know, if we can remove that feeling from the lives of autistic people, it's going to benefit everyone.
I think also people, you already know you behave that you are different. It's not helping at all. Sorry, my brain is just totally frozen and gone blank.
No, it's okay. No, but you're right. Like, we know that we are neurodivergent. We know we don't perform typically. Like, we don't need someone to sit there and be like, well, that was a bit different, do we? Like,
because what it does is, if you've had that and then you just want to withdraw from the world and you don't want to show up again because of that shame you already feel, so you don't need another person to tell you what happened wasn't great, because you already know it. You've already got that shame. What you need is the reassurance to know that you can still show up, because that sort of further isolates you.
Yeah. And I think also associated to that is attitudes. I can think of one situation where I had a really bad year one year and I couldn't leave the house without completely melting down, unless it was under very specific circumstances. Like, I was in a car with someone I was safe with and they drove me from A to B and came with me. And someone else said, well, you can't be that anxious about leaving the house, because if you were, you wouldn't be able to get in the car. It was complete invalidation. Like, we can't predict necessarily what is going to trigger meltdowns or shutdowns. But, you know, invalidating our experience because you think we should be able to do it because, well, you can do that without that happening. Like, it's not okay.
No, they don't understand sort of the variability in responses and the variability in needs and support needs at all.
And this is the thing about dynamic disabilities, is the ways you are disabled and the degree to which you feel disabled can change over time.
Sai says they won't be totally avoided, but offering support and trying to understand what triggers someone can help.
Yeah, I like that. You know, understanding someone's triggers. Like, I mean, like Sai says, knowing the triggers doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be 100% fine all the time, because some triggers are literally unavoidable.
Yeah, I think it's supporting people to understand themselves and their sensory needs and what goes around, and discover what the possible triggers are, and to actually understand what's happening when there is a meltdown and a shutdown. And by having that information, you know, it doesn't make the experience any better, but you know what's going on.
Beyond that, though, also, you know, if you have a loved one or a student, you know, someone who you are around regularly who experiences meltdowns, you could have kind of like an action plan in place. You know, here are the things that will help, here are the things that will hinder. You know, that person can tell you, this is how I would like to be treated when I'm having a meltdown. You know, it's that always assume competency thing. Don't assume because somebody's having meltdowns, they're not able to express to you what should happen when they're having a meltdown. We have to give people autonomy, even in those moments where they've lost control.
So it says it's situational. What triggers me today might not tomorrow, but might again next week.
Yeah, 100%. So, did we want to talk about shutdowns a little bit? Because I feel like we've kind of alluded to shutdowns. Okay, we have another slideshow. So, shutdowns, what are they? Shutdowns are internalized meltdowns in which the autistic person has become overwhelmed and is distressed in the same way as a meltdown, but that distress is kept inside instead and is not visible. An autistic shutdown is more difficult to spot because they are not expressed externally to the extent that meltdowns are, but they can be just as harmful. A shutdown might also occur right after a meltdown or before one. Yeah, we alluded to this, didn't we? For me, like if I'm having a shutdown, it's like a dissociative event. Like it's like I've kind of just checked out and I'm watching myself on a movie screen and I can't do anything except kind of watch myself unable to do anything.
Yeah, it's like the world sort of slows down. I don't know. It sort of goes on around you and there's some awareness of it, but it's like you're not part of it.
Yeah.
And you're aware things are happening. And in some cases, I can relate more to shutdowns and they're more of a common occurrence than meltdowns. But in some respects, they're more frightening because you almost feel imprisoned by it. I don't know. It's almost like drowning is how I would describe it. It's like everything is going on inside, but you can't actually get any of it outside or know how to even begin to communicate it.
Yeah, it's kind of like jumping into a swimming pool and then realizing your pockets are full of rocks and there's nothing you can do to stop it. You're just going down into it.
And your brain sort of freezes. Almost everything almost freezes. And you're not aware of time passing or anything. It is a very strange, but frightening experience.
For me, I guess it's almost like being unconsciously conscious.
Yes.
Well, Sai, did you have anything to add here?
So it says, during a shutdown, I feel like I'm paralyzed or frozen. My body may feel heavy and unresponsive, and I may struggle to move or respond to stimuli. My thoughts may become jumbled, and it can feel like I can't think or understand anything. I may also become nonverbal or have difficulty processing language, making it challenging to communicate my needs or feelings. Similar to meltdown, it feels like there's more loss of control during a shutdown than a meltdown.
Yeah, I would agree with that because for me, my physical body just stops responding to my brain. It's really intense. Is there anything anyone else wanted to add before we move on to the next slide?
No, it's just an intensity that nobody can see.
Yeah.
It's almost like an invisibility.
Yeah.
They can't see the chaos. They can't see anything. So to outsiders, it's almost easier for them to handle.
Yeah.
And and people wouldn't realize the distress that was going on, because to outsiders, it's probably preferable to a meltdown.
Yeah.
But they're not realizing that the damage is, if not equal, if not greater.
It comes back to my my hot take on challenging behavior, which is that it's only challenging when it inconveniences other people.
Yeah. Because there is, to outside, this is manageable.
Yeah.
This person is not going to sort of create any sort of labor and time, when in fact their needs, there is still the distress, and it goes unnoticed. And I think that's a lot when you look at schools and things like that, and why a lot of autistic people are missed, because there's things going on, but they're not challenging anybody, so it's denied. There's no observable sort of reaction.
Okay, shall we move on to the next slide? The signs of a meltdown, a shutdown, sorry, might include withdrawal/isolation, reduced or no communication, low activity/loss of interests, sudden low mood. I mean, one I would add to that is I myself, and I've also seen other autistic people experience a complete loss of responsiveness. Like literally just sitting, staring blankly, completely unresponsive to the outside world.
There's still a fire going on internally, almost.
Yeah. Okay. Sai, do you want to add anything to this slide? Okay. The causes is exactly the same as meltdown. So sensory overwhelm, exhaustion, increased expectations and demands, lack of control, autonomy and choices, changes, difficulty navigating social situations and relationships, feelings of rejection, sensitivity, dysregulation. I think also in my professional experience, people who are more prone to shutdowns have somewhat of a more traditional, I don't like the word traditional, there's a certain trauma profile that you see quite regularly in people who are very predisposed to shutdowns, because they've been through the sort of trauma where their brain naturally wants to dissociate out of distress. Obviously with shutdowns kind of being similar, in my experience, I can't speak for everyone, but from what I've witnessed, when you get people who have been through traumatic events that typically are associated with dissociation, you tend to find them more prone to shutdowns. So this is one of the reasons why anyone working with autistic people should really take a trauma-informed approach. Because, I mean, let's face it, untraumatized autistic people are somewhat of a unicorn anyway. But, you know, if you're working with someone who is experiencing frequent shutdowns, you need to consider, is there something deeper that is adding to the distress that they're feeling, that is causing their brain to just go, nah, sod this, I'm out. Like,
it's a protective response. and often it's also not safe to externalize behavior, externalize it, or safe to have that response. And it's, yeah, so it is all internalized. It is sort of sometimes an unconscious way of suppressing what is not safe to express either.
Yeah.
Sai says, after a shutdown, I feel exhausted and drained. It can take me some time to recover, and I may need to rest and avoid overstimulation for a while. I may also feel embarrassed or ashamed of my behavior, even though I know that it's not something I could control. After a meltdown, I might get a dopamine hit, but with shutdown, I just withdraw.
Yeah, that's something which we sort of missed mentioning with meltdowns. Is sometimes you do get that sort of, we call it a dopamine hit. I'm not sure anyone's actually ever checked that's what's actually happening, but you can kind of almost rebound off of a meltdown, I've found in my experience, and sort of go almost the other way. But shutdowns, they can be exceedingly overwhelming.
Aucademy says it's important for me to have a support system of understanding people who know how to recognize and respond to my shutdowns in a helpful and supportive way. It's sort of understanding the very subtle signs. And I know in my child, I can notice it, and it will be the staring, or it will be the flickering of the eyes. And there's very subtle presentation that would not, or the eyes will widen, and it would not be apparent to anyone else, particularly anybody, teachers or anything like that. They would miss it, and particularly in a classroom situation or a busy, that distress would be lost. And that frozen response means that you literally cannot move away from the situation that you're in because it is totally frozen.
Okay, shall we move on to the next slide? What to do? Due to shutdowns being harder to identify than meltdowns, they might go unnoticed, and without the knowing the person is experiencing a shutdown, they could be made worse and be further overwhelmed. If experiencing a shutdown, the autistic person should be allowed to retreat into a safe space and process/recover in a way comfortable to them. Offer comfort items and company with safe person. The person should not be pressured or forced to re-engage or communicate. Yeah, this is really important because, as we've said, people in shutdowns, communication might not even be an option. You might not even be processing words that are said to you. You might not be physically able to engage. So trying to force someone to engage.
I think, and also, I mean, people say, oh, well, offer ways other than mouth words to communicate. But sometimes you're so locked inside and frozen, you can't even use those means. And that is where it is needed that another person understands the signs.
Yeah. And obviously, if someone is sort of inside of themselves, physically unable to express what's going on, sitting there and pressuring them is literally going to add to that distress, because they're going to be trying to respond to you and physically unable to, which is it's not a pleasant experience.
Aucademy says, meltdown, I want to be left alone. Shutdown, I'm more receptive to being comforted, but it's very much situation and person dependent. Yeah, and it's dependent on if the person around you or the environment you're in is actually feels safe or the person is safe.
Yeah, yeah. And this is the thing, is to be one of those safe people, you can't be putting this pressure to perform on someone. The minute you put that pressure on someone, you've stopped being a safe person. Shall we? Yeah, there we go. What not to do. Do not put the person in a situation that you know will cause them distress or overwhelm. Do not force communication or engagement. The person needs time. Do not punish the person for having a shutdown or use behaviorist methods to bring them out of it. Do not judge or shame the person. They are responding to overwhelm, and judging will only make them feel ashamed or guilty for asserting boundaries by withdrawing for safety and recovery. And this is fundamentally what people need to understand. When we shut down, we are not being difficult. It is a survival mechanism. Like, you don't punish people for trying to survive. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
I think, yeah, and the fact of using behaviorist methods and talking about desensitization or putting the person into that situation because they'll get used to it and things like that. So they won't shut down, and not realizing that almost leads to masking, to more shame.
Yeah.
And it just further escalates. And I do wonder almost sometimes with shutdown, when you are suppressing so much and the energy has to go somewhere, how much that comes out in illness.
Yeah.
And yeah, and pain and everything, because that tension, to hold that within the body is colossal.
I mean, the more meltdowns and shutdowns I have, the closer to burnout I get. And in my experience, I have never had a burnout where I do not become physically ill.
Mm.
I always know when I am hitting a full-blown burnout, because I mean, I will become like deathly ill. Like, not like, oh, I've got a bit of a cold, like proper, like cannot get out of bed, feel violently ill sort of thing. And this is the thing that people often forget about autistic people, is that it has an effect on us over
Yeah.
long term.
And Chloe says one of the reasons I didn't think I could be autistic is because I don't have external or observable meltdowns. But then I learned from the community about shutdowns, and so it highlights why we educate on autistic experience at Aucademy, because the information is limited. Yeah, because so many people are being missed because this is not known about.
Yeah, and professionals just do not give you any information on this.
They don't know the information.
No, I've heard a few professionals sort of loosely refer to meltdowns, but quite obviously not really knowing any details about it. They've sort of used the word meltdown as a buzzword. I have never heard a non-autistic professional talk about shutdowns. Like,
Well, they wouldn't, because it wouldn't come to their attention, because the person would never come to their attention.
as Chloe says, this is exactly why. It's exactly why we do what we do on Aucademy, because someone's got to be getting this information out there, haven't they?
And it's also for the person it's happening to. They know what it is. They know what's happening, because when you don't know what's going on, you can't connect with yourself because you don't understand the experience.
Yeah.
And that is when it sort of makes it feel even worse. I think if you can name something, then it helps. Autistic Berserker says, how long do your meltdowns and shutdowns last? My meltdowns usually don't last more than 15 minutes, but my shutdowns can be much longer.
the peak of my meltdowns, the bit that people will look at me and go, he's obviously having a meltdown, probably about 10-15 minutes. But the sort of prelude and the aftermath, like there can be like an hour or two of build up. You can, people who know me can see the escalation coming, and then there'll be boom, and then there's like this sort of trailing out period afterwards where I'm sort of recovering from the meltdown. Shutdowns, hours and hours and hours for me.
Yeah, I think, and also professionals often think of it like sort of the traditional sort of anger volcano, that if there's a build out, a boom, and that goes down, and don't realize, particularly when heading into burnout, that almost afterwards is the point where it can come back in, and there's rebounds, and it isn't just that one event. And shutdowns, it's not just hours, it can go on for a very long time.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're in burnout.
Yeah.
Aucademy says my meltdowns can last very briefly, a minute or less, to hours, and overflow into days. My shutdowns are longer, hours to weeks. That's yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you get, because when you're in shutdown, you're not aware of the passage of time. So you're not aware of how long it goes on for either. It just almost becomes the norm.
It's kind of like just losing a chunk of your life sometimes.
Yeah, because you're almost not aware of it.
Yeah. Are there any more questions to go up on screen? Here we go.
Lisa Marie asks, is it possible to be in long-term shutdown? That would probably be called autistic burnout then, right? Yeah, and I think there's almost, with autistic burnout, the burnout may be short-term, but it also can be long-term as well.
Yeah, and I think it's possible to be so burnt out that you are effectively in a protracted shutdown. Like it's just drawn out. And as Sai said, it can go for hours, weeks. Like it depends on the person and just what cognitive resources they're working with. You know, you take an autistic person and you overwhelm them enough, their brain will just check out for. I don't think anyone really knows exactly what the longest shutdown possible is. In theory, it's however long it takes a person to recover from it.
It's almost like a point of hibernation. It's a protective, the body's protective factor. It's like sometimes with illness, sometimes that's the only way to stop someone, to allow them that, to enforce the body to stop and recover. And that's when people ask, well, what can you do? How long will it take? And you can't say. You can put in place the things that will support it, but there's no sort of thing for bringing about the recovery from it. And with autistic burnout, you sometimes wonder whether you actually do ever recover to former levels. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think if we were trying to differentiate between burnout and shutdown, shutdown is more of a. I'm trying to think how to word this. I don't want to say it's a singular event because obviously it can go on for a long period, but shutdown can be like because of burnout. So if you deplete someone's cognitive resources enough, they will shut down. And the process of recovering from burnout might involve them going into shutdown, out of shutdown, into shutdown, out of shutdown. And, you know, that could happen on and off throughout the burnout as they're trying to recover.
Aucademy says, I think, at least for me, shutdowns stop after or shortly after the trigger has been removed, will continue until the trigger is removed, whereas burnout is long lasting no matter where I am, what I'm doing, and recovery just takes time. Yeah. And I think, sigh, 69 days. Who knows? I was waiting for that to get in there. Yeah. Now you've lost my track of thought. Gone. But shutdown can be an instantaneous reaction as well to something that is totally averse or reminds of something that you're unconscious of. Yeah. And Libby said in the comments, I will add that burnout can be the trigger, as David said. And Cornerstone City 777, can you talk about autistic anger, since that can be related to a stressful situation?
Yeah. I mean, for me, anger, I do anger differently to non-autistic people. I can be extremely chill about most things until I'm not. Like, to put it bluntly, if someone pisses me off in just the right way, it is like setting off a nuclear weapon. I'm not like aggressive per se, but or at least not physically aggressive. But if I get angry enough, this is where I start to wonder, actually, if anger goes far enough, I do have like a huge meltdown effectively. But it's like that meltdown becomes entirely focused at the cause of my anger.
I think for me, anger is something that I struggle with. For me, anger is danger. And it was understanding that anger is just another emotion. It's not always dangerous and not always associated with violence or trauma. So for me, it is pretty rare. Anger for me, those feelings of anger will make me feel unsafe within myself. Therefore, I will shut down and it will become internalized.
For me, this is where it crosses over into my experience of addiction as well, because what you mentioned about like recognizing that anger isn't necessarily dangerous. I used to hate having feelings because every feeling felt dangerous to me. Every feeling felt like something that I would make a judgment call and be, this is not good. And it didn't matter what that emotion was. And so for me, the easiest way to not feel things was to turn them off with whatever drugs I could get my hands on. And I think this probably plays a role in why we've seen research emerging saying that autistic people are more likely to self-medicate. Because if you are a person who emotions do not feel safe to you for whatever reason, in my experience, often trauma, you've been taught that your feelings, expressing your feelings will put you at risk. Where you get that sort of intersection of experiences, it becomes really dangerous. And for me, part of learning to reduce my meltdowns, I had to learn, especially with anger, to not make those judgment calls on myself, to say, I am feeling angry right now and it will pass. It's almost like mindfulness, but I approach mindfulness differently, I guess, because the way it's been taught to me by mental health teams really makes me angry, ironically.
It's also anger, the feelings there, they sometimes lead to a loss of control and are out with your control, which is angry, and it makes you angry in itself, and then kicks in the fight and flight response as well.
But if we were if it was beneficial to be in control all of the time, we would be able to do that because, you know, we're creatures of evolution. We would have evolved to a state where we were in control of ourselves all the time. There is obviously an evolutionary reason why sometimes we just lose control. So it's okay to lose control sometimes. You don't have to be in control 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365
No, and I think
a year.
And I think that is the way of sort of almost dispersing that stress, that anxiety, that energy out with. And that's why I think almost the shutdown is more dangerous. Sai says it's all or nothing, cooing or feathers everywhere.
I like that, cooing or feathers everywhere. Yeah, that sums it up pretty well, actually.
I think, God, that has to be the most phenomenal quote ever. Sai said, I spent several years trying to be Spock and Data from Star Trek so I wouldn't feel.
I did the same. I did the same with Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory. When I first learned I was autistic, before I entered the autistic community, I tried, emphasis on tried, to relate really hard to Sheldon, because that was basically the only autistic person I'd seen on screen that I knew of. And I tried to be this kind of like emotionless, take everything literally, you know, unfazed by most things sort of person. And actually it was really unhealthy. Autistic people have feelings. We have feelings. We are not emotionless robots.
Academy says, experience alexithymia. I've struggled to pinpoint anger, but I usually experience in response to injustice. I find it very consuming, which can be overwhelming and confusing in itself, leading to meltdowns, shutdowns, and burnout. Yeah. And I think sometimes you can dissociate to the point of not knowing the feelings because, or being aware of them because you are so disconnected from yourself as well. So you've got to wonder how much trauma plays into this, into the alexithymia and the shutdown.
Yeah. And alexithymia, again, like it comes into that whole thing of
here's what I found.
That's my echo thinking I'm talking to her. That word that means we struggle to articulate our emotions. It plays that role in that fear of loss of control, I think, because if you don't know what you're feeling, you feel out of control. So for me, sort of teaching myself that it's okay to not always be in control really helps. Does anyone have anything they want to add as like some final thoughts, maybe?
It's where my brain goes blank.
Yeah, that's why I asked, because my brain's gone blank as well.
Yeah, my brain has shut down. Yeah, it's past 4 o'clock now.
Well, I think we've covered a fair bit, actually, considering this has only been an hour. I feel like this has been a good discussion. Do we have? Oh, I know what's on next week. Next week is myself and Priscilla talking about cults and substance use. We're going to take a look at the world of drug addiction and cults and the crossovers between the two. We've actually had some meetings to plan this one, so look out. Like, we're organized and stuff, you know.
Did we cover things in No, never cover things in mayonnaise. You just know that it's just not going to happen.
Unless it's pasta. I do love pasta with mayonnaise.
Oh, you cannot have mayonnaise on pasta, please. Say no.
Yeah. I also like mayonnaise with chips.
No, just that. Yeah. Libby says no,
David. This has started a whole thing now. The chat's going off. No, David.
No. That's the anger.
I sit aggressively in the middle ground here because I like salad cream and mayonnaise. This war has been going on for a long time, and I have never picked a side. I have tried to introduce my own team on a few occasions, but it's never really taken off. But for the record, I do have this hot sauce that I put on everything. It's called Red Ring. It gives you an idea of how hot it is.
Just no, mayonnaise is just a total sensory aversion. Chloe says not mayo, no. Salad cream, yes.
Why not both? What?
You cannot have mayo and salad cream. Just no. Why would you do that? Just no.
Yeah, I'm neuroqueering your expectations of condiments.
It will never happen.
That's what they said about putting men on the moon.
No, I'm not putting mayonnaise in my mouth again.
You could put mayonnaise on the moon.
Quite happily, yes.
Not all of it, though. I need some for my pasta.
No. No.
Yeah, time for awkward waves. So, bye. Oh, wrong hand. Bye-bye.
Oh.